Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will begin in 1 minute.
At Northrop Grumman, we've been developing new ways to execute the mission. What once was seen now stays undetected. Where alarms were once raised, now there's silence. With our full-spectrum cyber capabilities, our military can eliminate enemy threats at the push of a button. That's the value of performance. Northrop Grumman.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of AFCEA International and AFCEA Augusta Fort Gordon Chapter, welcome to the final day of TechNet Augusta. As a reminder, please set your electronic devices to silent, but keep them at the ready so you can text or email your questions for this morning's panel to askmetna@gmail.com. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin this morning's program, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the following companies for their support of TechNet Augusta. Hortonworks, represented by Trey Hine, Account Manager for Department of Defense. Juniper Networks, represented by Brian Ellis, Senior Manager of Business Development. Parsons, represented by Mark Jarek, Executive Vice President, Security and Intelligence Division. Unisys, represented by Brigadier General Fred Henry, U.S. Army retired, Client Executive, Defense and Intelligence. And Wildflower International, represented by Scott Coulter, Global Account Executive, U.S. Army DoD. Please join me in thanking all of our patrons and sponsors. At this time, please join me in welcoming to the stage Colonel Mike Warlick, United States Marine Corps retired, Vice President, AFCEA International.
Good morning. Good morning. We're going to get this thing going here in just a second. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for being here this week. Thank you for making this conference bigger and better and greater than ever before. We really appreciate that. Today is no exception on what we've had the first couple of days of this week. We have a power-packed sessions today. I'll talk about those a little bit later. But we're going to start with a power-packed event this very minute with a special presentation, and then we'll get into the program right after that. This really follows suit to a comment I made yesterday about STEM, the session that we had on Monday. It's not connected to, on Tuesday. It was not connected to that per se, but this is a potential opportunity that you'll hear about in just a minute. We have this special presentation this morning is from the National Math and Science Initiative. I'm going to give you some background, introduce our presenter, and then we'll proceed with the awards. The National Math and Science Initiative is a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming math and science education and proven effective programs that can be replicated nationwide. NMSI, pronounced it's NMSI, if you may or may not be familiar with it, has served teachers and students in more than 1,000 schools across the United States, training over 50,000 teachers and providing advanced placement education opportunities for more than 2 million students in 37 states. This is a significant program. NMSI is a partner with the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, which funds programs in high schools that educate significant numbers of children of active duty military families. Today, the Academy of Richmond County High School and the Richmond County Public Schools are being recognized for their support of Fort Gordon families, and they joined the National Math and Science Initiative cohort school year 2018-2019. Here this morning to honor the Richmond County schools in their role helping eliminate STEM deserts, literally deserts where there's no STEM action at all, and provide high-quality and rigorous education programs for our military children is Dr. Bernard A. Harris, Jr., CEO, National Math and Science Initiative. Many of you may know Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris earned a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Houston, a Master's of Medical Science from the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, a Master of Business Administration from the University of Houston, and a Doctorate of Medicine from Texas Tech University School of Medicine. He completed a residency of internal medicine at the Mayo Clinic, a National Research Council fellowship in endocrinology at the NASA Ames Research Center, and trained as a flight surgeon at the Aerospace School of Medicine, Brooks Air Force Base. He's also a licensed private pilot and certified scuba diver. He has challenges. Dr. Harris is a veteran astronaut, having logged more than 438 hours and traversed over 7.2 million miles in space, and he was the first African American to complete a spacewalk. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Harris to the stage.
Good morning. How's everybody this morning? I know when you heard that 7.2 million miles in space, you probably asked this question, did he get any frequent flyer mileage for any of that? The answer to that is no. But I had a lot of fun along with my colleagues. So it really is a pleasure to be here this morning. I'd like to thank AFCEA for allowing us to interrupt your conference for what we think is a very special event. I'd like to give a couple of shout outs to the President, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Shea is here, and also Mike, thank you so much for the introduction, Colonel. I really appreciate that, for your warm welcome here. I also would like to recognize the Commanding General of Fort Gordon, who's here, and that's Major General Morrison, and the whole garrison and his team there at the fort. They have been partners with us for a few years in the schools surrounding the fort in the local Augusta area. And then last but not least, of course, I'd like to say welcome to all the uniform and civilian men and women who serve our nation. Thank you, as always, for your service. I mentioned that we have some programs in the local area, and let me recognize a couple of folks, Dr. Sean Alford from Aiken, South Carolina, and Sandra Caraway from the Columbia Schools, County Schools. And they have been instrumental in introducing our program to the area, as I mentioned before. Fort Gordon and the Augusta community stands out as a model for the rest of the nation in terms of developing meaningful education programs. I passed just recently, or just today, this investment that you're making, the Georgia Cyber Innovation and Training Center. And I'm sure I'm sort of speaking to the choir when I'm talking to this audience. This is why what we're doing around math and science and STEM education is so important, and this is going to allow Augusta to be the center of the universe for combating cyber terrorism. And so if we're going to do that, that means that we have to make sure that the community in this area, starting in secondary and high school and college, are prepared to have a job in that center. So let me tell you that from my standpoint, having been involved in communities across this nation, Fort Gordon and Augusta and the state of Georgia are really making a significant impact. And as I said before, you're a model for the rest of the nation. Now, the Colonel's already mentioned what we do at NIMSI. We're in 37 states, as you've heard, over 1,000 schools, over 50,000 teachers are involved, which allow us to directly impact 2 million students across the country. And we have within our organization a very special program we call the Military Families Mission. And that mission is supported by the Office of Secretary of Defense of Research and Engineering. And so they have been instrumental in helping us spread our programs all across the nation in communities where there are military installations. So they do this because our program, our organization has measurable results. We actually put in AP, advanced placement programs, into high schools. And if you know about advanced placement, if kids who are taking advanced placement courses and they are able to have qualifying scores, not only does it prepare them for college, but they actually get college credit. So it really is an important program, and we're glad that this community is part of that. So today, I'd like to highlight the growth of the program in the area by talking about what we're doing here locally by introducing a few folks. We have with us today Superintendent Angela Pringle, who has been instrumental in not only advancing the school system here in Richmond County, but through the Academy of Richmond County High School, she is qualified to receive one of our DoD grants in which the DoD supports here. So in addition to that, she went to her board and said, we want to do just more than one school. We want to expand the program. And so we're here today to announce that they're going to be expanding this program into 3 additional high schools, and I'm looking at her to start. We hope that it's going to be in other schools too, and I'm also looking at your president here. So Dr. Pringle is a very strong leader, and her, with the leadership of the board, I think they're going to make a tremendous impact in the area, which not only helps the area, but helps the kids at Fort Gordon and the rest. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Pringle to come up, along with her president, Marion Barnes, president of the board of Richmond County School Board, and any other board members that we have here. Would you please come up? I also like to ask Lieutenant General Shea and Major General Morrison to come up and join me on the stage. And last but not least, Colonel Jim Clifford. And we're going to do a very special check presentation. And when we unveil this check, you'll see it's a very large amount. Again, it's through the partnership that we have with the Department of Defense and ensuring that this community is about educating our kids and preparing us to be leaders in the nation.
Please welcome back to the stage Colonel Mike Warlick.
I've got to say it. Let's give these award winners another great round of applause. You know, it's so ironic that this occurred this morning when we had that teacher session on Tuesday. It was not really anticipated. There's going to be a little magic going on. You're seeing it to my right. I'm going to give you a little update as we get going. We'll get this panel on the road here very shortly. If you have the app, you have everything you need to know about this program, and it really is better than a little paper handout that we have, but the paper handout helps get you going, so you can find all those things there. We want to thank Hortonworks for sponsoring the morning coffee break that we'll have a little bit later, and we also have a break in the exhibit hall immediately following the morning panel. Be sure to take advantage of the chance to visit any of the booths that you haven't visited. I went down this morning. It's a fantastic floor down there. It really is, and you've got a few more hours to enjoy that and challenge the vendors that are there. In addition, we've got roughly 300 students that are going to show up sometime today, and they're all looking forward to a nice check like that one day probably. Additionally, Booz Allen Hamilton, I want to thank them for sponsoring the lunch today. Today's lunch will be served as a grab-and-go style, a little bit similar to what you experienced. Be quick and effective for you. Service will begin at noon. In between this morning's address and the luncheons, we have a number of things that are going to be taking place. One of those, you'll see those on the wing boards, I think, if they're up there. If not, I'll talk a couple of them through. Many of them are support education training through CompTIA, GIAC, or other sessions, other award organizations. Just as a reminder, we document attendance at those continuing education for AFCEA members. If you're a member, it's automatic. If you're not a member, we'd like you to join, and we can make it automatic for you for any of those continuing education efforts. I think today will be, it's going to be fast and furious. We have a PEO EIS session this morning in the theater. We have a General Yee session back from the CIO office with a panel that will include Mr. Pontius in the engagement theater. And we have General Mingus, of course, who will bring, he's going to do more than close the conference today. He's going to bring the operator perspective to what we all want to hear. So we're looking forward to you joining that this afternoon. It's now really my pleasure to introduce the distinguished panel this morning. You've heard the term SEMA for the last 2.5 days. You're going to hear it more from a different perspective from the panel members on the stage today. First, I want to introduce our moderator for the panel, Major General John Morrison. You know him well. A little bit of background, since General Marcin's done a number of things, but he hasn't been up here talking to you yet, so here he comes. He assumed his duties as the Commanding General of the Army Cyber Center of Excellence in Fort Gordon during August 2016, right about the time this program was taking place. He and his team have played a key role in developing TechNet Augusta over the past 2 years. Very active this year and working this program for all the right reasons with the modernization efforts that are taking place across the Army. He received a commission in 1986 through ROTC, James Madison University. Previous command assignments include Commanding General of, I'm good? Okay, very good. I like that. Ladies and gentlemen, Major General Morrison and his panel.
So nobody likes to hear all that stuff, so we'll stop it. And I'm going to apologize now for that bright light that's hit me in the forehead. It's reflecting back on each and every one of you. There's nothing I can do about it on my end, and Mitch, you feel my pain. So this morning we're going to talk about SEMA and how it will support our joint and Army forces in multi-domain operations. And I just want to provide a little bit of context to what we have heard over the last couple days. We've heard that it's not about synchronization. That's not going to work in today and tomorrow's battlefield. It is about integration. And that is a theme that we will continue to drive on. We're going to hear, we've heard that we must sense, we must understand, we must be able to decide, and then we must be able to act. We've heard that we must have a network that is very, very flexible and defensible, simplistic, yet complex. And so, how do you bring all that together and make sure that the network is only one thing? It is a weapon system that our commanders can employ. And so we have a very distinguished panel that are going to be here, and they're going to bring different perspectives. You've heard a lot about the tribes. I will tell you, we've got the tribes alive and well up here on the panel. But I think you're going to hear a very, very common message. And what I'm going to also tell you is this is going to be completely unscripted because we haven't had a chance to talk about anything yet.
No, sir.
And so we'll see how well we do with that portion of it. But what is important is various capabilities coming together to be integrated, not synchronized, because if I leave you with one thought, it is about combined arms maneuver in cyberspace and the electromagnetic spectrum. So what I'm going to ask our panel members to do real quick is just very briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to go down and give some brief remarks. Sir?
Thank you, sir. I'm Alex Cochran. I serve as the Senior Cryptologic Advisor to United States Army INSCOM.
Hello, Chad Acey. I am the Senior Cyber Advisor for U.S. Army INSCOM.
Hi, I'm Dave May. I'm the Senior Intelligence Advisor to the Cyber Center of Excellence.
I'm Steve Rehn. I'm the TRADOC Capability Manager for Cyber under the Cyber Center of Excellence.
Good morning. I'm Jason Henneke, our Cyber Future Ops Director.
So essentially what you have are executors and operators on the left-hand side of the table, followed by the institutional arm in the center, and then we're going to end it with Army Cyber, closing it out from another operational perspective. And Alex, I'd go ahead and ask you to start off, please.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank AFCEA for this up in Fort Meade, where I work. AFCEA Central Maryland is a key part to not only STEM education, but what we do as a business. So when I found out that I was going to be talking or addressing the concept of intelligence support to multi-domain operations, I had to do a little research. As the son of a military historian, my dad taught me that history does not repeat itself, but it's the lens through which we view the present and prepare for the future. When the chief was visiting the multi-domain task force in July, he gave some historical context for multi-domain operations for our Army, and he talked in terms of after Pearl Harbor in the Pacific Theater, Admiral Nimitz and General MacArthur utilized mass naval and air fires to enable Army and U.S. Marine Corps land operations, amphibious operations. And that, in many ways, was the beginning of our thoughts about multi-domain operations. So when I talked to the old man about, hey, I think this is a great example, my father reminded me that General MacArthur's G2 was not perhaps the sharpest knife in the drawer. And he pointed me towards Desert Storm. And in Desert Storm, we saw where, again, we took maritime, land, sea, and air, and then it introduced the space component into enabling precision fires across multiple domains to produce remarkable effects. Key point in there is that our adversaries noticed, and they took note, and they began to prepare. Today, after 17 years of counterinsurgency operations, we find ourselves facing a new era of great powers competition, where we have a pacing threat in our adversaries. General Townsend recently wrote in an article talking about operationalizing multi-domain operations and multi-domain battle. He wrote, MDO represents persistent competition that cycles through varying rates in and out of armed conflict, executing integrated operations. So if you think in terms of the threat, up front, General Perkins talked in terms of we need to take a threat-based analytical approach. And emphasizing that this is not an Army-only approach. We've partnered with the Marine Corps to execute this. And both General Perkins and General Townsend point us towards the National Defense Strategy. So if you haven't read it, please do. I will tell you that our bosses have emphasized it. And you look at where we are in terms of the focus areas. At the SecDef level, we talk in terms of lethality of our force, dynamic force engagement across the globe. Our chief has us looking very much at our readiness and focused on the future force. My boss, the Army G2, General Barrier, talks in terms of how do we present an agile, adaptive, resilient force that's enabled by today's and tomorrow's technology. Operating as an enterprise, and I think that's a core point as we look to enabling intelligence in multi-domain operations, is operating as an intelligent enterprise simultaneously across all domains. As a career SIGINer, we often used to talk about how SIGIN is a team sport, so it becomes innate to me. General Morrison talked about the tribes. I got a great quote from General Barry the other day, sir, because everybody sort of heard about this friction that's going on. And General Barry reminded us that without friction, there is no traction, and that's something we need to move out on. I would argue that intelligence role in MDO, and if you look across the force options within multi-domain operations, they talk about a contact force, and there is no better contact force for our Army than our intelligence enterprise. We can maintain contact across the constant engagement, across all domains, converged, if you will. And again, General Perkins talks in terms of persistent competition across all domains. Within INSCOM, we talk about setting the theater as a primary task for our theater military intelligence brigades. To set a theater, you must maintain constant contact. Where General Johnson has us going today is what we call operationalizing Phase 0 and Phase 1 operations. By setting the theater and maintaining that constant contact with our adversary, it allows us then to set the conditions for enabling both mission command and decision-making at the speed and velocity that today's multi-domain operations demand. And always being mindful of never being late to need. That is where we can open up those windows of opportunities, windows of advantage talked about on multi-domain operations. So again, a pretty important focus on enterprise operations, as well as maintaining constant contact with the adversary.
All right, great. So Alex and I are counterparts. I'm Frick to his Frack, or vice versa, but as a cyber advisor to INSCOM, the goal in my portfolio is about intelligence support to cyberspace ops. However, as we're starting to see this discussion about integration of SIGINT, Cyber EW, and other things, what we're really talking about is it has to be an integrated focus on what we call CEMA, right? So if we call cyberspace electromagnetic activities, it really brings together the mission space. And intel support to CEMA in support of MDO really, you can look at it in a couple ways. First off, we have traditional, tried and true methodology in intelligence space to look at our adversaries, figure out their vulnerabilities, figure out their opportunities to come after us. In the same vein, though, we have to look at, how can we apply that information to the targeting process in order to put, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic fires on target as needed. So tried and true intelligence methods are at use there, but we really need to get faster. As we talk about MDO, there's a need for this faster integration of efforts in order to open up the windows Alex talked about. So things like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, machine learning, right? The list of buzzwords goes on. Cross-domain solutions, all these things are really needed for us to get quicker. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about multi-domain operations and we talk about potentially having to operate isolated in denied environments, we really have to look at organic capabilities and as they pair with the capabilities we have throughout the Army, the national intelligence capabilities, joint coalition partners, and really in the open source environment, everything that's out there. So fairly complex. But we don't want to rely on just having what we have organically until we need to. And the way to do that is make sure, as Alex has talked about, that when we operate in an enterprise, we're sharing information across the board. So take the tried and true intelligence methodology, but you really have to understand your mission space. So we can't just do intel for intel purposes. It's got to be pointed at what the mission space is. So as we look at multi-domain operations, we really have to ask the question of, okay, so CEMA support on the intelligence side has to answer a couple of very specific questions now. We have to look at unique aspects that maybe need a different approach that the tried and true intelligence approaches perhaps don't give us at this point. We need to look at the timing requirements and make sure we understand when we're trying to do targeting and we're trying to do defense on the fly, we have to understand that the information has to be at the ready for commanders to make decisions. And lastly, we potentially are going to need to have a specialized workforce. We're going to have to look at our MOSs. We're going to have to look at our training to ensure this rapid integration of information can happen. I also want to highlight something General Morrison talked about, and that's the networks. It's the protection and defense side of things. As a lifelong SIGINTer and EW guy, EP was one of those things, that electronic protect was one of those things that was kind of ignored. It was the also ran. It was like, yeah, we're going to do that too. We actually have to do that, right? In order for us to be able to operate as that standalone entity, that last line of defense out there, we're going to have to be able to defend locally. but we also have to look at it in the enterprise process. And what is the intelligence support required to ensure that we can defend all the time in real time and ensure operations can happen? So lastly, I want to go back to something that Alex has already highlighted, and that's this concept of operating as an intelligence enterprise, really as an intelligence warfighting enterprise. We have to have that focus. If we don't, we're going to really struggle to get at, the purpose for what it is that we're doing. So setting the theater, further on, really setting the globe, because we have to be able to hand off from point to point, especially when we look at in the cyber arena, our threats may not be in our AOR. The effects that they're putting on us that are affecting us in the warfighting AOR may actually be back at home. So we have to consider the global nature of it. So lastly, I'll kind of paraphrase from something I've heard throughout my career. It's hard, but hard is authorized. So we got to get to work. Thanks.
Hey, thank you. I know you're out there, but I can't really see you with that light. My name is Dave May again, and throughout this conference, we've heard from multiple senior leaders talk about the future operational environment. We've heard themes like the erosion of overmatch, that the U.S. is going to be contested in all domains. In fact, in cyberspace, in the electromagnetic spectrum, we expect it to be both contested and congested. We expect an expanded battlefield that's going to be more lethal and hyperactive. And we know we have adversaries such as Russia and China that are basically creating physical standoff through layered anti-access area denial systems meant to inflict unsustained casualties very rapidly. The adversary is changing, so must we. There's an excerpt out of the National Defense Strategy that I think sums this up very nicely. It says something to the effect of America's military has no preordained right to victory on the battlefield. So given these assumptions of what we think we know on the future operational environment, what do we do to maintain and gain a competitive advantage in this space? How do we win in multi-domain operations? Well, one of our big ideas, and General Morrison mentioned it, is integration. Integrated solutions, and that takes the form of materiel and organizations. In fact, it can expand across the entire .mil-PF. But in the short amount of time I have with you, I want to talk about integrated formations. Why integrated formations? Well, General Fogarty in his keynote talked about speed will be decisive in future combat. We have to sense, understand, decide, and act faster than the adversary. Integrated formations will help us do that because they will break down traditional stovepipes that have induced latency. And integrated formations will be innovative because they'll help us create novel approaches to problem solvings by leveraging multiple skill sets. So I'll talk to you about 5 force designs that integrate cyberspace, electronic warfare, and intelligence. And some of those also incorporate fires, information operations, signal, and space. The first one is the Cyber Electromagnetic Activities Sections, or CEMA sections. These sections will be placed at each staff element across every echelon, from the BCT through Division, Corps, all the way up to the Army Service Component Command. These sections will be responsible for planning, synchronizing, and integrating cyberspace and electronic warfare operations and spectrum management. Now, they work for the 3, but they're constantly integrating with the 2, and they're part of the targeting process. They network both horizontally and vertically with the other CEMA sections and the units of action. And this force design is in its final stages with DA. We expect it approved within the next 6 weeks. And it's a no force growth to the Army. We will reorganize our existing workforce to create them. Second one is the EW platoons at the Brigade Combat Team. These are the units of action that will deliver effects at the tactical edge. They will be assigned to the military intelligence company, and working in tandem with the SIGINT teams, they will essentially double our sensing capacity in the electromagnetic spectrum. Think of that, double our capacity. And they'll also help us sense ourselves, which will help with survivability. They will conduct electronic attack and be able to deliver RF-enabled cyberspace effects and MISO. Like the CEMA section force design, that force design is also in its final stages, and we expect it approved by the end of this fiscal year. Thanks to already approved growth and some of the existing workforce, we expect to be able to build out one of these platoons for every active component BCT in the Army, starting in 19. In fact, we will pilot that this fall. Number 3, we're going to put EW companies at the core. And like how we brought the EW platoons into the BCT, into the MICO, we're going to place these in the Expeditionary Military Intelligence Brigades and leverage the intelligence capacity there. They will have a downward reinforcing mission as well as a counter-reconnaissance mission, doing deep sensing and deep strike to support long-range precision fires. The Army Campaign Senior Leadership has already recommended that we build an initial capability, 1 company per EMIB, starting in 21. At the theater level, we're building something called a multi-domain task force Intelligence, Cyber, Electronic Warfare, Space Detachment. A lot of words. But like its namesake, it will integrate all those capabilities plus signal, information operations, and targeting. And they will support the multi-domain task force counter A2AD mission. We are going to go ahead and pilot that this fall out at Fort Lewis. And lastly, the Cyber Warfare Support Battalion. This is a service-retained capability, OPCON to our cyber, that will integrate intelligence, cyber, electronic warfare, signals, I/O, and fires, all into one formation to deliver effects both remotely and through flyaway teams referred to as expeditionary SEMA teams that will plug into those SEMA sections I talked about to support the commander's schema maneuver. And that we already have approved growth for, too, for an initial capability, and we'll start that again in 19. So let me leave you with 4 out of those 5 force designs we're going to start immediately. And they are there to provide a competitive edge in multi-domain task operations. Steve?
Thanks, Dave. So talk about multi-domain operations being an inflection point for the Army. I would argue that the basic principles of warfare remain the same. However, the execution of that is different with the technology as we move forward, and then the integration of the capabilities across. So some of the very stovepipes that we've seen in the past, it's the multi-domain is how do I take those together and start integrating those together to maximize those. So I'm going to talk a little bit from a capability standpoint as we look through. So it becomes the application of those technologies and new concepts and new ways to be able to apply those on the battlefield is what is changing. The cyberspace allows, or what cyberspace does is, at one point we did have sanctuaries. We no longer have sanctuaries. If you think about a contact in a multi-domain environment where we were deployed forward, we had 2 oceans on the side of the United States. Those oceans now, because of cyberspace, allow adversary to come back into our sanctuary, the United States. What does that mean? That means we got to challenge ourselves on how do we think about a true multi-domain battle, not just on the battlefield itself, in the area of operations, but also back throughout the entire infrastructure and entire capability of the United States. What is happening, though, is we start building capabilities out into the force, and we start looking at it. Dave talked a little bit about being able to take cyber, EW, electronic warfare, intel, as well as space and signal. But we need to get capabilities that are more modular. Modular from a standpoint is I pull the capability out, it shouldn't be a signal system. It should not be a MI system. It should not be a cyber system. It should just be a platform on the battlefield. That platform has the capability with technology to go forward to either transmit radio communications, to be able to project electronic warfare, or be able to do cyberspace activities. At first, we're going to have to do it. It'll probably be hardware dependent, but we need to move to more a software base to do it on the fly, allow that, again, that speed and decisiveness from the commander to be able to execute on the battlefield. Being able to integrate those capabilities together to mutually tip and cue each other is where we absolutely need to go. I'll also throw in another piece. We talk a lot about securing the network. I'll throw something in, and it's not just about the network as we think the network. When you think about all of the platforms we have on the battlefield, every single platform we have on the battlefield has some form of software code or some form of compute on it. Those are vulnerabilities as well. Those create opportunities for us from an adversary. Adversary has the same aspect, but they also create a lot of risk on our side of the house. So we can't forget that it's not just about the communications network. It is about the technology that also enables our weapons platforms in order to deliver the fires effectively on the battlefield. The other piece I will throw out is flexibility. As we build those capabilities out, rapid prototyping, being able to have the flexibility of taking prototypes of advanced technology, innovative ideas, soldiers' innovation itself, combining them on the battlefield, allowing them to put into environments where I can prototype together, and I'll say without a lot of bureaucracy over the top of it. Give them the freedom to do it on the battlefield, to test out the TTPs, test out the technology, test out how we can actually rapidly move in multi-domain, actually will accelerate things freely. We've seen in the past, we've been doing it, we have experimentation that's going on. Those that allow that flexibility to occur, we see rapid innovation, where we stifle it and have very rigid process along with it, and don't allow the vendors who build the capability, our capability developers and our soldiers all together, constantly working together, we tend to slow down. Not just on the battlefield, I'll talk a little about the sanctuary, but the other piece to enable multi-domain, we also have to look at our business processes to build those capabilities out. Army's made a large investment in the decision on Futures Command. We're moving in the right direction. We also have to realize, and one of the things that we've been successful in the DCO side of the space to move rapidly with capability is acknowledging that the Pentagon operates on three processes: requirements, acquisition, and also funding. Have to synchronize all of those. You can't just do the prototyping in the field. And to enable that prototyping and capabilities, all three of those processes need to modify in order to enable the rapid speed that we need for capabilities to deploy for multi-domain operations.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, and I appreciate AFCEA and General Morrison the opportunity to speak here. And up front, I apologize also on this end for the other Chrome Dome. I guess they bracketed it, sir, for us to get this through.
You're not allowed to steal my jokes, man.
All right, sir. Acknowledge. A good start. I'll turn it back over to you.
No, Lieutenant Colonel Henneke, go ahead.
All right, sir. I have potential, I guess. Now, just in terms of some context to lay out the understanding first. Again, Jason Henneke, I've been at our cyber for about 38 months, and I definitely am one of the ones that when I talk my perspective here, I am a infantry former commander at the one of the first security force assistance battalions. I left infantry at year 20 and became a strategist. So the last 5+ years, I've been trying to find myself to figure out what the Army is truly intended to do, where it's going. And so, again, when I came to our cyber 3+ years ago, got put in the future operations, it truly opened up what's out there, what we've been doing. And again, as General Morrison said, the tribes up here, I don't fit in any of the tribes, not a signal, not intel, not cyber, not IO, but I've been working around all of you for the last 20+ years. So it really does come back to the idea of the multi-domain operation, which is who can deliver right now, who has the con, who's best suited, go, and it changes quickly. So in terms of the overall, my topic specifically was the idea of looking at CEMA expeditionary with a reach back support to MDO. So there's a lot of information packed in just that title alone. Just based off the panel said, the whole idea of an expeditionary. So again, expeditionary clearly means for General Milley with the #1 requirement, which is readiness and delivery. That's one of the lessons learned that I'll discuss here also overall, saying General Milley has turned to the Army and say, I'm the one paying your bill, deliver for the Army. I know you're also part of USCC as a service component, but the Army pays your bill, so I need delivery to the brigade, corps, and divisions on their front line. What can you do for me right now? So that's the idea going into the last 4+ years at the now we always say 10+ CTC rotations. You may say 10 rotations we've been working out between NTC and 1 at JRTC, but the plus comes back to there's been small level rotations such as the Security Force Assistance Brigade, that they really don't necessarily connotate it as a full deployment NTC rotation. So you'll hear 10+ rotations as far as where the CSCB, and again, initially the C in CSCB was just cyber. Now with the CEMA support to Corps and below, It expands, as Wayne Sanders, who has the overall lead on this program, says, two acronyms within acronyms, or two acronyms within a word. So it kind of goes back to, again, bringing into the idea that Mr. May said, this is all about integrating, fusing, integrating, and syncing, and going on to the perspective. The second part, as far as lessons learned, when we look at the reach back, is thousands of operations happening daily between defensive cyber operations for Paul Stanton's lead, or just back to our normal, our OCO requirements between Northern Command with NORAD, Cent Command, and also AFRICOM. So in terms of the different areas, all those lessons learned are brought back into daily and informing as we go forward. The second part, which is going back into more and more requirements, is specifically with the cyber blitzes. So in terms of going into the experimentation with the brigade itself, going beyond just signal and networks, bringing in the cyber-specific requirements in that. One of the last areas I look at is, as we stated with Paul Stanton's elements going on forward, the defensive operations with the teams in the CONUS are daily. Over 20-plus teams operating on in the area, and specifically looking at, again, traditionally, everyone looked at these as, oh, those are just natural, the defenders of the necks and the areas. Well, the teams are out there basically specifically looking at targeting adversarial effects, and we all know, as far as the competition, again, another key part of MDO was getting away from a battle but to a competition. The competition is daily in this arena, so in terms of how the requirements are as far as the capability developers specifically targeted towards supporting this. Looking at some of the lessons learned in this area, specifically, as I stated, first of all, be careful what you ask for. We asked to be brought forward, and so now the expectation is delivery. In terms of looking at some of the last 4+ years, the hardest part was actually replicating the specifics of a training center, not just what the quote-unquote the blue for elements is, but what is the op for, and what's the natural gray space of the environment needed to replicate the training. And that goes back to what we'll say a lot of times, which is informing. We're using the training centers to inform not just what necessarily is required from the maneuver force, but also from the adversary force, both just in terms of a congested environment operating, but also as an adversarial environment. The second part we'll look at specifically really was the intelligence requirement. Again, this is an operation, so in terms of I have to have a clear picture of the intelligence to understand quickly how, as General Fogarty brought to us constantly, which is sense, understand, decide, and act, but come back to assess and evaluate also. Again, whoever can operate fastest will win this competition. Looking at thirdly, really was the authorities, and that's a large part of the requirement when it comes back to a reach back. Where do the authorities actually lie between whether it's our cyber element or JFHQ USCC requirement as far as staff that actually can deliver the capabilities that are required. Again, forefront is the element that has the requirement for it. The brigade commanders don't care whether they own the cyber element or not. They want the delivery of it, just as in fires. They don't have to have that Apache battalion, they don't have to have the MLRS battalion, but they have to have the effects of it when they want it. So that's in terms of saying, I don't necessarily own the cyber element, but I expect the timing and tempo when I need the fires to be delivered. The key aspect also is looking back in terms of just the speaking to an Army brigade commander, to an Army division commander. You'll hear the term often brought up by General Hartman, which is dolphin speak. And I'm clearly one of those. When I first walked in, it was dolphin speak to me. So in terms of understanding of saying, what do you actually deliver, as opposed to the commander saying, this is what I need. I need these effects brought forward. And often that's back to where the idea of the reach back comes in. And going into really about 5 areas in terms of what the reach back, what we've learned from this, is specifically is there is not enough capability out there to position an aspect, I'm sorry, not capacity out there to deliver the capacity and the capability forward at every spot. That's hence the idea of the remote operation requirement. An element back at Gordon, an element back at Fort Meade can deliver 360 degrees based off the requirement, timing, and space. And so that's hence the idea of, in a degraded environment, I definitely have to have forces forward, and hence the expeditionary requirement, but still a matter of being able to do certain fires and certain effects. Planning and synchronization does require the reach back. The other area that brought up quickly also is the capability development requirement, not just in software anymore, but also in hardware. Again, how fast can we turn on the requirement? Forward in a degraded air environment, we cannot do that fast enough. The code writers sitting back with the consolidated big data requirements, big data platforms can turn this faster. Going forward, it's not capable of that. And then lastly, really what I close out with was looking at really just the skilled expeditionary the teams. Again, as we stated, this is one of those areas where be careful what you ask for. How fast can you get the teams built up? And so this is one of those areas where there's constant training required for the teams. And so having a deployed force potentially sometimes limits their ability to learn quick enough. So having elements back at the Army Mission Center or the Joint Mission Center, they call it sometimes when you hear AMOC or JMOC, depending on which infrastructure they're working off of, specifically allows lessons learned to have the operator right next to the capability developer together, working through this together, which forward would not be able to be seen. But I'll look forward to your questions.
Jason, thank you. And we'll go ahead and restore your rank.
Congratulations.
Depending on how the
soon
rest of the
anyway.
questions go, we may go back the other way. There's an old adage that says, change is good, you go first. And we've talked a lot this week about integration, not synchronization. And that's obviously something that's very, very different, especially in this space. What do you see, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists this, what do you see as the biggest challenges that we face with really achieving integration, both from capability and formations, and how should the Army and the Joint Force address it? Alex, I'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
May you have another.
Greatest challenge. A month or so ago, I was on the Hill on a panel with General Fogarty and General Barrier, and we were talking. In this case, the context was future SIGINT, and then signals intelligence and electronic warfare integration. And I pointed out that, hey, on my 35 Gulf certificate, it says signals intelligence and electronic warfare officer. And the point is that this is nothing new to the Army, so we've done this before. We will do this again. But in terms of one of the things I was always cautioned about is don't try to boil the ocean. And I think that going forward, as we look into CEMA integration, is to identify the tasks at hand. Everybody immediately goes to the Title 10, Title 50 discussion in the context of authorities. The reality is we have a process for that. It's called SOTA. SOTA is granted in a Title 10 situation when we get that transition from Phase 1 to Phase 2 operations. And so I think part of it is that let's look at what we have done. Let's identify that critical path and move forward on it, leaning on those things that we have done well in the past and then shaping on how we move forward. Over to you.
Excellent. Great start, Alex. All right, I think I would say it's in the ability to share. And sharing really comes across multiple really spectrum, right? There's the technical side, meaning cross-domain solutions, ability for our boxes to push information. But really, I think we also have to get at the sharing of analytics, analyze data, fuse data, right? In order to be able to react very quickly in this environment, we're going to need to be able to have information at our fingertips that's already made into knowledge so that we can act. And we have to be thinking, although we will have to operate with organic only, we want that organic operation as the last step to be informed by a solution that brings together information from our allies, our joint partners, open source, all the intelligence capabilities fused together. So really, I think sharing is the most challenging aspect of the integration effort.
Yeah, from my vantage point as the senior intel advisor to the Cyber Center, I would say, and this is a General Morrisonism, breaking down the permafrost. So I'll tell you a quick story. Really, this whole integrated effort started about 2 years ago when General Morrison and General Barrier, who was the Intelligence Center of Excellence commander at the time, now the DAG-2, sat in a room and they took a look at two future requirements, the next generation Prophet, and we were working through a ground EW system called MFU. And they looked at the requirements and identified that there were quite a few similarities, and they said, well, let's just mash them together and create one requirement. Well, that sounds really easy, but over the next couple of months, we had multiple working groups, and we brought together the Intel and the EW community. And in a room like this, on the first session, if you asked everybody to raise their hand, all the Intel guys were on one side of the room, and all the EW Bubbas were on the other side of the room. And it took us probably 4 or 5 months of multiple sessions and building trust and relationships with each other before we felt comfortable enough to really start working through the problem set. But once we did, we made tremendous progress. So it's breaking down that permafrost, building trust among the tribes, and recognizing that we're all in this together to support the Army.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to throw down into 3 different areas. So one is echo somewhat what Dave says, which is the permafrost, but what I'll caveat it is process. We tend to be process focused and looking back to make sure that we're checking the block on a specific process as opposed to be focused on what the outcome should be, and then realize how can we accelerate to get to the outcomes, and being willing to take some risk in the process to achieve the outcomes at a much faster pace. The second area I'll do is in the capability development side of the house. It starts with the requirements. What I've seen since I've been as a TICM, when I first came in as a TICM, I would argue that most TICMs kind of looked at their own area and with blinders on and just looked at their own space. What we've seen is particular between my brethren, TICM EW, NNS, and TR, as well as over on the Intel side from TICM Terrestrial and TICM Ground. I will tell you that what's happening is my requirements are actually subsets of requirements for TICM NNS. They are subsets of requirements from TICM EW. So what's happening is we're getting to the point where we're actually integrating our requirements in. The community is still small and we're still expanding out, because I would even argue that I have requirements over TICM Mission Command. As we start getting to platform security, there are cyber requirements that have to go to throughout all TICMs. So that's one of the challenges, acknowledging that we are no longer independent requirements. We have to work together to mutually support each other. The last area from a technology standpoint to get to kind of where we were talking about integrated thing is we tend to focus on platforms and systems when the reality is it's about information and data. And so getting data standards and the ability to understand what a data strategy is and understand how I need to pass the data, who I need to pass it to, and ensure that we have a good data strategy to pass the data will allow us to get to that speed. What generally happens is we look at our own independent data strategies within our own tribe as opposed to looking at collective to figure out where does the right information need to be at the right point for the right decisions.
All right, from an operations perspective, I would look at it 3 areas. What the operator on the ground wants is specifically a capability requirement. He's not looking for a specific tool or specific named item. So in terms of be deliberate, but actually have a very transparent plan going forward. So, because again, ultimately it's about delivery. So the second part goes back to that delivery process. Somebody's asking for it on the ground. They're going to find a way of getting around it. So the window's open. Someone has their hand up saying, I need this product right now, I need this requirement right now, and deliver. So come through when the game is on. Because again, the competition's out there. Somebody else will fill it if you don't. And I think the lastly part is adjust. We often talk about, lessons learned, but too often we identify lessons, never go back through and actually incorporate and make the changes, and then come back and say, this is good enough, get it out there right now.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. John, before I ask another question, do we have any from the audience?
Yes, sir, we have plenty.
Go ahead.
Okay, sir, question number 1. Regardless of our operating concepts, the commander remains the most critical component of any operation. This panel just discussed a lot of new capabilities, new formations, new concepts. What initiatives are being discussed to better improve the maneuver commander's understanding of what these capabilities provide to multi-domain operations and their ability to make faster decisions on the battlefield.
Thanks, John. Steve, I'd ask you to start, and then Jason, if you can comment as well, I'd appreciate it.
Right, so what I'll focus on is when you get to multi-domain battle, commander cannot make a decision unless he understands the entirety of the battle space. We've got mission command systems that focus on the kinetic battle space. It also integrates the air picture inside of it, but what we lack right now is a comprehensive understanding of cyberspace. And when I say cyberspace, I'm using cyberspace very broadly as we define in 312, but it includes the intelligence aspect of cyberspace. It includes electronic warfare, cyber as well as the space assets, to include a social aspect of understanding and integrating what's happening out in the social media realm. Being able to combine that together, so there's an effort right now to, we'll call it cyber situational understanding supporting Army SEMA, is a capability that we're trying to put, where we are in the process of pushing forward. It will become a program later on in FY20. We are prototyping those now. To be able to tie that in, but it can't be, again, it can't be an independent thing that's sitting off on the side. It has to be integrated in with the overall mission command system so that the commander has a complete picture, not just of the kinetic domain, also with the land and the air, but also cyber and integrated together to understand the effects on the battlefield of how to ensure that cyberspace is integrated in the scheme of the maneuver of the commander.
As far as for the commanders, in looking at really going back through, I guess you'd say, a couple areas. One, just the formal process with the different schoolhouses as far as from Leavenworth, from War College, staff colleges, all throughout. So it's a matter of their being informed throughout as far as, do you understand where, again, this overall SEMA, again, as enabler, as its own domain, what's coming on through that. So that's one process. The other part we're looking specifically really is continued with the combat rotation centers. Again, historically it's been out at NTC. Next year, we'll also have one in Germany with the saber exercises. So again, exposing that area. Lastly, again, everybody has this understanding that these brigade commanders or knuckle draggers. A couple years ago, I engaged one of my peers in terms of discussion as he was going into Eastern Europe, and he specifically came back and said, "Listen, I read Wired magazine. I get exposed to this. I have my own network in my house. I understand the effects, what's going out there." You have to have also, I guess, a confidence and faith in our selection process that these commanders are selected for a reason, and they're all lifelong learners. That's my going in premise as I engage these, because as opposed to come across and making them think that, okay, I don't keep up with what's going out there. But again, they've all been exposed to a congested environment in the past years. Now we're turning to them saying, now this congested environment is actually brought on by the adversary. Having an operator in our cyber in terms of the personnel, often it's believed that the first thing that happens when you have an outage, delay, disruptancy, latency, oh, that's just part of the network, as opposed to flipping it on saying, confirm, validate that it's not adversarial. So again, it really is a matter of saying, balance that out with everything that's delayed as enemy, but at the same time, get the validation of intel that it's actually not. Oh, that's it.
General Morrison, if I could add something.
Please.
I think the power in the multi-domain task force pilot that Dave mentioned that's taking place in the Pacific is immense for us in this environment. We are being forced to support the 17th Field Artillery Brigade as they go through multiple efforts to see, how are we going to do MDTF. And there's great strength in trying things on for size, being able to learn and fail if necessary and learn from it in an operational environment. And so when I say we're being forced, what I mean is this integration story we're talking about is being brought together in every effort that is happening in this pilot. So I think that as we all closely monitor the progress, we're going to be able to learn, adjust, and keep moving forward.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts, John, and I'll turn it back over to you. So understanding, we've heard many times this week, understanding does not equate to awareness. Awareness is something lower. Understanding is something higher, and that's what we need to be striving for, and how do we bring it together in a multi-domain fashion. You can't have cyber and the EMS sitting over here, intel sitting over here, and then a half-baked land picture sitting over here. It must be fused so the commander can gain understanding so he can decide and then act. And that last notion of being forced, So I'll just pull the string on that a little bit. It's because this is a domain, and maneuver commanders need to maneuver through it. And so that level of integration, not synchronization, is absolutely critical. And Chad, I really appreciate your comment on that portion of it, because we are going to learn a heck of a lot, but it's going to help us integrate and move well beyond synchronization. John, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Next question. With all the changes ongoing, how are you managing the training of the signal and cyber and electronic warfare warriors to ensure the right balance for the men and women that will be operators in today's environment?
Well, the two commandants are sitting in the front row. Dave, Dave and Steve, I'll turn it over to you for some comments.
Okay,
some
I'll
thoughts, and then
play
come over to Tom.
pretend commandant here for just a moment. General Hersey, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So first of all, from the electronic warfare perspective, we're doing a couple things. It's going to become a sessions MOS. So in the past, we've brought in the workforce either through a VTIP process, either a company grade officer or NCO into electronic warfare. We're going to start bringing them in right away, right out of basic school. And so that requires us to create an entirely new set of courses specifically focused for AIT. And it's going to be much more technical based. So our approach in electronic warfare during the COIN environment was primarily focused at the counter-IED fight. We now have large-scale combat operations where it's not the old paradigm where it was hard to find, easy to kill. Now we're going to have a whole bunch of signals on the battlefield, easy to find but hard to kill. We have to teach them how to sense the environment and make sense of that. And that's a whole new approach. It's going to require a very technical skill set associated with our electronic warfare brethren. So that's going to start, and we're going to build our first AIT course at Fort Gordon. For those of you who don't know, most of our electronic warfare training right now is done out at Fort Sill. Secondly, there are multiple training teams that are out today that are providing cyber transitional training to our electronic warfare force, because as of 1 October, the 29 series become 17s. So all of that training is ongoing to make them not only an electronic warfare professional, but also part of the overall cyber corps. I think I'm going to stop there.
Steve, any comments?
No, sir. I think both schoolhouses, again, I'm taking this from an outsider perspective, so I'm kind of phoning a friend, but also probably going to get counseled afterwards. But what I've seen from both schoolhouses...
We'll see if anybody answers you.
Sure. The old TRADOC traditional POI system, the schoolhouses have taken tremendous strides to be able to maintain pace with technology. And I believe the POI is cyber schoolhouse has POI as a code or classes as a code, and I can't remember the exact thing. But basically what it is trying to educate, how do we educate the cyber soldiers? Signal School is doing something similar as well, which is maintaining the pace of technology and the pace of education at what I would call an unprecedented pace for TRADOC. Recognizing that the technical skills of the soldiers are somewhat of a constant pace of change, but the fundamentals somewhat remain the same, is how do you ensure that the fundamentals are taught, but also maintain pace with the technology. We've seen great strides inside the schoolhouse itself, from the cyber aspect as well. What is happening across the community and DoD as a whole is identifying what we'll call POI experts for each of those inside of each of the work roles in the cyber force. So it's not just about the Army cyber training, it's also about the Air Force and Navy and the joint service as well, and leveraging off that education off of each other. So we have Marine Corps, so I think we have all services now represented attending inside the school. So you're seeing that sharing of knowledge go through, which is only going to gain not only what the instructors see, but different perspectives, but also the force itself.
Yeah, let me throw a couple more quick comments in, if I may, sir. We're also looking at bringing in operational instructors. So one of the great benefits about Fort Gordon is we have a convergence of the institutional and the operational force. Now, we're still building out the cyber force, but one of the great benefits is that we have the 782nd MI Battalion, the Cyber Protection Brigade, the Joint Force Headquarters Army Cyber, physically located with the Cyber Center of Excellence. And we can take service members directly off of an operational assignment and bring them into the classroom so that the courses and the information stay relevant to the task at hand. And then we can quickly get them back out to the operational force so they can get spun back up.
Please.
Sure, just one observation on what both Dave and Steve was talking about, certainly on keeping contact with technology. A number of things that we've done. The G2 recently signed out the new Army SIGINT strategy, and one of the lines of operation within there is educating and training the SIGINT force. Technology has moved on since the 20th century when a lot of our initial electronic warfare doctrine, policy, and regulations were put together. So what we have done is with the Cyber Center, we've engaged with the director of NSA in his role as a combat support agency to better understand and delineate the electronic support tasks contained within the electronic warfare operating system. And we've also now put together a tactical SIGINT course that, again, through some experimentation with the Marine Corps in a series of joint interoperability exercises where we're assessing both the signals intelligence as well as the electronic warfare tasks that both the Marines and the Army are doing today. And that's informing what we're doing at Huachuca as well as informing what's happening here at Gordon.
Alex, thank you. John, that's a great question, and I'm going to throw out this notion that, inside the schoolhouses, we're moving away from training because training is what units do, and we're moving towards education. And it's this notion of, and it's causing some friction, but we're working our way through it, outcomes-based education versus task-based training. And in a network world, in a cyber domain that's ever-changing, I would submit to you that if you try and do task-based training, we are not going to get to where we need to be. And so what do I mean by outcomes-based education? Outcomes-based is, I'm just going to tell you what I want you to get done. How you get there is up to you. And by doing that, what you allow is flexibility to be built into the process. And you get troopers out there that can think their way through problems, and as a new technology or capability comes along, they're able to rapidly employ it much faster than they would if I said, you need to hit the on switch. Okay, the light is now green. Now do this. Where they're not really thinking through the problem, they're just doing what they're told. That's not the operators that we need inside the cyber domain. And I would submit to you that applies to signal, cyber, electronic warfare, SIGINT, and anything that's going to be operating inside this very, very complex domain. And so that's the model that we're moving towards. That's quite frankly, in the cyber school, that's the model that we have implemented. That's where we're moving toward with our EW components. And when you hear the phrase foundational training that's being implemented inside the signal school, that's exactly what it is. Outcomes-based. Get there. Get there rapidly, think through the problem. And we'll turn over a much better product to operational formations where they can go in and do collective training and team training and things along that line. Hoorah. Wasn't expecting that. John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. One more question. Speed to capability has been mentioned frequently. What's the most important thing the Army can do to increase that speed, and how can industry help?
So we're going to approach that from a couple different directions. What I'd like to do is hit the operational units first, and then Steve will close it with you. Sure. Alex?
Well, sir, yes. So as we have been engaged between the Cyber Center and the Intelligence Center on what we're calling the T-list today, those of us who've been around the Army for a while remember this thing called ground-based common sensor. See my comments earlier about not trying to boil the ocean. It's important to develop a roadmap, but more important is it's the ability to prototype, fail, engage, correct, prototype again, and continue to do that. Rapid, agile, we call it Scrum Masters, agile development, those sorts of things. And I think as we go forward, and T-list is a great example in terms of there's a big difference between sensing and jamming. We've done it before. But now I believe the Army and our leadership is giving us the ability not to deliver a capability that has a SOW or statement of work or a PWS that's this thick, but the ability, what we're doing today, with the prototyping within MDTF and others, is freedom to fail, freedom to prototype. And I think that's very important for us as we go forward.
I think at the larger level, we've already talked about one of the chief's initiatives, which is multi-domain operations, but the other one of Army Futures Command, I think there's a promise that Army Futures Command is going to increase the speed at which we do these kinds of things for everybody. And so close partnership with Army Futures Command as it develops, so that we can take advantage of that leading edge kinds of thing they're doing in step by step, or, you know, in step with each other. We can't let, I don't think, this is Chad speaking, we can't let Army Futures Command be the only innovators out there, the only people thinking about getting there quickly. I think we want to harness the energy and excitement behind the stand-up of Futures Command, rather than sort of worry about the changes that we're all going to get to experience. We got to take advantage of kind of the new focus, apply it through some of the things that Steve's already talked about, and get to the answer quicker.
Jason?
I think a key part of this is just staying involved with the actual integration of the operations process. And so what the actual requirement on the ground is very clear based off having that context of being right there with the person who's generating the requirement itself. And the second part on this, I also, when I hear that, what I'm thinking back through in terms of right now where we've often been focused on, let me get a product out there that meets, it didn't necessarily meet the requirement, but it's a product that met some of the areas. So pushing hard specifically to say that peer-to-peer adversary that we're actually focused on in the future, as opposed to let me go find an enemy that I can actually put this capability to. So that's kind of, that may slow down a little bit, but it goes back to pushing hard with the actual peer-to-peer adversary that we're looking for.
Steve?
Sure, I'm going to give a couple points. So one, we got to change the processes. Our process right now, and I would argue that in some cases in the DCO and the cyberspace, we've been pretty successful in changing the process. What we've done instead of defining the discrete thing we want at the end state to the T, what we basically did is, from requirements, is define the vision of where we want to go, basically set a left and right limit, and set this is my first step. Successfully inside the Army leadership has bought into that and has given us that flexibility, which has allowed us to accelerate capability down, also delegating the authorities down to General Morrison to make capability drop approvals and or General Fogarty, depending on what the capability is. So that's some significant steps from a process standpoint. I think we also got to be willing to take those risks, fail fast, identify things and fail fast, but then move off of it. Not get trapped, because in some cases we wanted to deliver a product that was a no-fail for the soldiers in the battlefield. Inside cyber, in particular inside the space that we're talking about right now, is we've got to be able to take those risks, identify them, and then move on and learn from that very rapidly. I think there's also a fear to engage with industry. And I say the fear to engage with industry somewhat because we're strapped, the acquisition folks and most of the Army guys are kind of fearful from a standpoint of, hey, I don't want to violate any type of acquisition law or acquisition rule. We got to figure out how to break those down. So engagements such as this and having those open conversations helps us to understand where those innovative ideas are out there. I think the other piece that we also have to figure out is when we talk about innovation, in particular in cyberspace, talk about what has the internet done in general, crowdsourcing of great innovative ideas. It's no longer large companies that come up with the greatest products. It is also the small, innovative 3-4 man element or person element that one person lives in California, one person lives in Maine, and someone lives down in San Diego that has been collaborating, that comes up with a great idea that could be that innovative technology that really moves us forward on the battlefield. How do you discover those, and then how do you have the conversations to understand what's even out there when it's something that we haven't even thought about yet? We got to figure ways. DIUX is trying to do that with Silicon Valley. We've got Army representation out there and elements out inside of Boston. But we got to figure out better ways to signal industry what our S&T needs are, what are our capabilities that we want to have to be able to find those innovative technologies, then get into the prototyping side of the house. Also, as we put it, and I kind of hit it on before, I've got to get it to the hands of soldiers as fast as I can. Typically, in the traditional model, we would take a very serial process, start from requirements, and eventually, at some point, years later, I hand it off to the soldier. being able to take it right up from the front. The synergy at Fort Gordon of having the 2 operational units that we support to get in those conversations right up front with the program managers moving and having presence down here. So that synergy between the capability developer, the program manager, and the operator from the get-go is absolutely enables it to go fast. The operational community, well, hats off to Colonel Stanton. He's recognized that in order to get capability to the field, he has to have his operational force participate in that process. So being able to have that participation is key, because a sacrifice today for a soldier to be able to come talk to me or talk to the PM about capability, in the end will have significant capability impacts to the soldier tomorrow. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve. Dave, any comments?
Just quickly, since we're running out of time, what can industry do to help? And I think we've talked a little bit about this, but through these exchanges, we've told you what we think our requirements are. Now it's important to hear back from you as to what's within the realm of the possible. Where can we take it to the next step? Open architecture is absolutely critical, as we want to try to accelerate capabilities out to the field. Technologies from one company to the other company have to integrate relatively quickly. We normally put the burden on the PMs to do the integration, but wouldn't it be great if 2 companies who heard a pitch, know what we're trying to do from an integrated perspective, decided to get together ahead of time and integrate their 2 technologies and brought them to the table in advance, so that the PM didn't have to take on that responsibility? It would speed up our processing time and help us get product out to the field faster. That's
Sir,
it.
can I add one more thing, sir? Part of our problem as government is we like to tell you exactly how to build things. We got to get to large capability statements, along with Dave saying, hey, this is what we want the capability to do, not how to do it. And from that gives you as industry the flexibility to figure out innovative solutions and be able to have the trade space required in order to meet that capability at a much faster rate. Because as we try to dictate to you exactly what it is we want to do of all the widgets in the tech specs, what ends up happening is it takes us 6, 7 months, years to develop those. By the time we get it out to you, those tech specs are no longer valid and no longer current.
Alex?
So having spent about 5 or 6 years in industry before I came back to government, the one thing I would say, and this goes to rapid prototyping and being able to deliver, and what I would ask of industry is don't tell us what you aspire to do, tell us what you can do, and be prepared to deliver what you talk about in your white paper, particularly as we want to turn it quickly. And that's a very important lesson, having sat now on both sides of the table. Thank you, sir.
Alex, thank you. Just to wrap up real quick, this is a time of dynamic change in our Army, and our industry partners are absolutely essential to the Army's modernization strategy. We need your help. We need you to be willing partners, and I take note of what you just sat there and said, Alex. That is very, very important. The other piece is integration is not synchronization, and the Army in cyberspace, to include the EMS, is moving towards integrated capabilities, integrated formations, so that we can maneuver in and through the cyberspace domain. I really appreciate your attention this morning. Thank you to AFCEA for the time. We really appreciate it. And Mike, I'll turn it back over to you, sir. Thank you.
I promise to be really, really short. I hope, sir, that you'll release the video that we took so that those who are not here today and those that are here today can digest what this fantastic panel accomplished during the last roughly hour. Sir, we pride ourselves in putting together a panel. You put together a world-class panel today for this. Thank you very much, sir. And for Lieutenant Colonel Henneke, Colonel Henneke down at the end, I think you made a comment, lifelong learning. If you're not a lifelong learner, you're not going to make it in the military, and you're not going to make it out in industry either, because it's changing so fast. With that, thank you again. We've got engagement theater that starts at 10, PEO EIS. They haven't been here in a year, so you might want to spend some time down there with that. We've got General Yee panel. There's other breakout sessions, and lunch will be going at 12 o'clock. And don't forget General Mingus up here this afternoon at roughly 1:30. Have a great morning.